I also will come to this part. Bitan.
That's the other side of the coin.
Because I've had so I'm totally never my data is
No, I don't look at it. I mean, I look at it, but I don't actually. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't log in and check it. Actually, but that's hard. I think the buying is game and selling is hard. It's like early. Yeah, that's the hard. That's the hard one.
but honestly, I want to I'm just harrowing. This is, I think, when they have more hair.
Then I show pens.
I think like everything is very curious of what's the But we have two other plates on dish and menu extra
You're not paying any money.
No, it's coming.
You pat you on the shoulder.
I'm staying here. Ship up this person, guys.
All right, guys.
You're also part of the returns.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all of you for coming. Listen, I know it's a. Let's be honest. You had nowhere to go. So I won't let it go to my head too much. But, no, but honestly, I'm really thankful that all of you came, especially Canadians, because I just want to talk to Canadian friends. We really love you. And what you hear from the old country. All right. But anyway, a couple things. Number one, this is really, and I really want to stress that this is not a marketing event. I'm not here to promote AMA. So I'm just here to answer questions. If you have questions about AMA, I have two gentlemen who organize this event, Cyrus and Robert, and they really put a great job doing this. So but thank you. But I'm not going to talk about this here today. So I'm here basically to answer your questions and to hear from you. And I'm really touched you're here because I write 2 hours a day, every day from 5 to 7. And when you write, it's very difficult to write into this, right? So when I write, I think about people like, think about your faces. Okay, well, you're gonna read my, what what I'm writing, and that makes it so much easier to connect with with my audience. So that's why I wanted to do this, so I can actually connect with people who read my articles. So one last point I want to make is that we live in a very politically charged environment. If you ask me a political question, I'll answer it. But if you don't ask me, it's in the barrel. So I just anyway, what's the procedure? So I need to speak up, and both of my kids are here. Well, I have 3 kids, but 2 of them are here. At the back, there's a John over there, standing tall guy, and there's Hannah. Ask some question. Oh, sorry. Okay, at the end, okay, how about this? Okay. At the end, if you want to ask me questions, just, ask them questions, just, you can do that. All right, so how are we going to start? Where are the microphones? So the microphones here and there. Just come up to the microphone, ask a question, and I'll try to answer. So, and tell us where you're from, your name and where you're from. All right.
Figured I'd jump on it while I had the chance. Ross Solomon, Austin, Texas. You know, I'm a value investor, and I think a lot of times as value investors, we're contrarians. And one of the things that I personally struggle with is confirmation bias. So I was wondering if there's anything that you do personally to avoid that, and if there's any advice you could give me.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Is it working? The microphone. Thank you so much for the question. I think us looking for confirmation bias is us just being human, right? Because when you were in a tribe and it was another tribe attacking you, you wanted to be surrounded with people who kind of share your belief systems or agree with you, right? So the confirmation bias is something very natural to all of us. Now, as an investor, my goal is, and I keep saying this all the time, but I really believe this, and I'm going to quote Seneca: time discovers truth, right? So as an investor, my goal is to discover the truth before time does, right? So when I look at a stock, when I look at a company, I try to talk to as many people about it as possible, right? Try to figure out what other people think. And then when I find out what they think, so somebody saying I don't like the stock means nothing to me. But when somebody says I don't like this company, here's why, and suddenly they start giving me bullet points, that actually matters a lot to me, because now I got a gift. I got a thesis to disprove. Okay, and if I can, so I got more data. So I always seek out other people's opinions. I'm lucky that I have a lot of investor friends. A lot of them became friends, actually. And so I always seek out their opinion. But then when I listen to it, it's not I don't like it, and that's where it stops. I'm listening for those bullet points. Here is why. And then I just start analyzing. So that's for me, those are data points for me to analyze. I hope I answered the question. Yeah. Other questions? Right there.
Hi. My name is Ken. I'm from Taiwan, and I've been very honored to be here and ask questions to evaluate yourself. So my question is, in a sideways market, do you think that selling put options and selling call options is a good strategy?
All right. So I think, thank you for this question. So I think options, I'm going to be speaking general first. I think options could be a very tool in your portfolio as long as it doesn't blow you up. Problem is options, they can blow you up. A lot of times you can be looking like Wall Street will sell you a lot of investments where you're looking for coins, for 10 cents on the highway, and the truck runs you over. Options can do that too. At the same time, you can use options defensively, and they can generate you extra income. So let me give you an example, and I think this is what you're alluding to. Hypothetically, we own Uber stock. Okay, but hypothetically, it's $80 stock, and I think it's worth $100. That's not what I think. but let's say it, right? Let's say I do. Okay, then I can basically sell calls, right, at 100. And if Uber got it to 100, I would have sold it anyway. But this way, I still made another $3 or $4 in the process. That's that's actually in this case it makes sense, right? So options are just another tool that could be overvalued or undervalued. And if you use it responsibly, and most importantly, if it reduces risk, it doesn't blow you up, I don't see any reason why not to use them. But again, like by the way, also, I would argue you don't want to overuse them because they should be kind of a icing on the cake, but not the whole cake. That's, so, yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem. All right there, hi.
I'm Jerome Vandergast from New York. Thanks for taking the time and answering my question. I'm curious how you think about time when it comes to the reward. At the IMA dinner, you mentioned one of the interesting things about investing is you don't know when the reward comes, and you just quoted Seneca. How do you deal with the opportunity cost of time, especially in a market where price discovery seems to be impaired, or at least working differently than it did in the past? Thank you.
That's great, John. Thank you. Great question. So we integrate this into our deeply into our investment process, and let me explain how we do this. When we look at a company, every stock in our portfolio, we I'm trying to figure out how to explain the spreadsheet in words. But basically what we do, we put a fair value on the company 4, 5, or longer years out, and then you discount it back. So why it matters? Because let's say there's a company that's not growing earnings, and then let's say there's a company that is growing earnings. So if I put a company that's growing earnings 5 years out, actually I'm getting paid with earnings appreciation, right? Now, if I put this, another company on this, on the same scale, and 5 years out, it's not growing earnings, then time is actually working against that company. So therefore, the discount at which I buy the stock is much greater. So in other words, if it takes 5 years for the market to revalue the company and it's not growing earnings, I have to buy it so much cheaper. So we have companies with different growth profiles, but internal rate of return 5 years out basically equalizes that. I think, so that's how we do that. But I'm very, so another thing it does is introduces companies in my portfolio. Like when I started investing, I feel like, I feel like every investor, every value investor goes through this transition. You kind of start in a dumpster. Like you start buying these companies that look very cheap, like look statistically cheap, and say, oh God, look at this wonderful cold stocks at 6 times earnings. Okay, this is how like almost every value investor I know, this is how they started investing, right? Because and it's easy and it actually makes sense. And this is how I started investing as well. Because the reason it makes sense because I got my master's degree in finance. I've been taught how to look at a lot of numbers. So it's so easy to say company that's traded 10 times earnings is cheaper than a company statistically cheaper than companies traded 15 times earnings. But so it's easier for us to grasp this simple algebra. Now the true analysis comes to understand, well, okay, this company has a significant competitive advantage. It can grow earnings for a long period of time, right? This company has good management and bad management. This company is good, allocate capital, this and this. This one may not look like it has a lot of debt, but it has a lot of releases, whatever. So this becomes qualitative analysis. So I feel like a lot of investors start with quantitative analysis first, like quantitative looking at statistics, and then they graduate after they lose a lot of money and make a lot of mistakes, and they did. They kind of graduate to adding qualitative factors to that. And growth, use it value growth. I'm a value investor, and one of our largest positions is Uber, as you guys know. And because there's a significant value when the company doubles or triples or quadruples its earnings, right? The company becomes worth more. Now, it matters how much you pay for it too, by the way. So it's not, it doesn't mean that anything's growing should be bought. But introducing these elements into your portfolio, and if you look at a lot of times you look at our portfolio, if you were to be analyzed by a consultant, and they would look and say, well, you're a value investor, but you won't Uber. So it would break their models. Well, to me, it doesn't. It's their model. But anyway, so we want to integrate all these components into a framework, and the way we do this is just by value, putting all the positions 5 years out and discounting back. So hopefully that's your question.
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes.
Just because you touched on competitive advantages and sort of the multivariate aspects, do you adjust?
Is this better? Okay, all right, sorry guys. I can only get so close to this. All right,
So I'll ask this in a quick fashion.
Yeah.
Obviously, not all earnings growth is equal. And if I think about companies that have wide moats and the capacity to generate significant excess returns, so returns above their cost of capital, how do you factor that in? Because you can have a company that's growing earnings, but to the detriment of its ability to generate excess returns over time. So just curious how you incorporate that in that IRR analysis.
Well, I think the math kind of speaks for itself. And if company does not earn its cost of capital, then to generate those earnings 5 years out, they're going to have to either increase debt or raise equity, for the most part, right? And so we'll simplify it. And also, that company probably not going to pass our quality screen. So there's a kind of several mechanisms that kind of, I think quality. We are. When I, as I matured as an investor, the way our portfolio looked has changed. And the way it changed is that I started to realize life is too short for me to own, kind of low quality companies. So for us, quality became this kind of absolute, kind of bar. So if I see it's a company I'll give an example. We were looking at a company recently where it's probably one of the cheapest stocks I've ever seen in my life. It's like something where I could objectively say this was a dollar trading for 20 cents. Absolutely. But then I started looking at the management, and I realized it's because the management that it's $3 management for $4. It's the management that run the company paid themselves a huge amount of money. They made poor allocation decisions in the past. And look, the old me said, "Well, look, this is a cheap company." The new me basically says, life is too short and move down. So that's how I deal with it, I guess. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. By the way, I apologize. How's the microphone? Because I hear feedback. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me well. I can hear myself absolutely fine. So it's all right, we'll go there and we'll come back there. Okay.
Good morning. This is Rahul. I'm from San Jose, California. Thank you for hosting this event. I have a question as a retail investor, and I do really enjoy your letters. I read them thoroughly. The question is that, so if you guys are analyzing a new sector or a new industry or a particular business, beyond the statistical analysis what you just mentioned, how do you look at new industries or areas or companies which are unknown to you? And how do you come up with better models beyond the statistical ones? Like the management side you said is one, but new places, like say for example, the industry is cyclical, or the like tourism could be cyclical, construction could be probably cyclical. How do you analyze that?
I'm gonna, for what I'm about to say, I'm gonna give credit to Brendan, my analyst, who's my ex-analyst, who's sitting right there. And I'm gonna use this analogy. So because Brendan is a big sci-fi fan, and that he gave me this idea. But let's say you read a book by John Grisham, okay? Well, John Grisham describes the world that you know, right? Because he writes about it. Okay. Now, let's say you read a book by Ian Banks, okay? Who's a sci-fi writer, right? And now suddenly there's 2 moons, 3 suns, people are not walking but crawling, whatever. Not even people, they're different, you know. And suddenly you have to, for you to start, you're starting in this book, you have to build this new world, right? You have to understand how this society actually functions, right? Kind of investing is a little bit like this. When I'm analyzing like industries that I've analyzed before, this is me reading John Grisham's book because I already know how that works. When I'm looking at the industry I know nothing about, it's a little bit like I have to build my own world. I have to understand where's the value in this system. You know, is it the suppliers who make most of the money? Who has more bargaining power? This kind of stuff. So when you look at when I analyze an industry, I have to build this completely new world for myself. And then you kind of start looking, once you learn about the industry, you start asking some question, do you want to be in this industry, okay? Or if you do, what kind of companies you want to own in this industry? Let me give you a couple examples. We used to own a company called Camping World, and our thesis was that when you buy RV, the Camping World is the largest retailer of our RVs, okay? And the RV industry was extremely fragmented. Like I forget the number now, but they say there were 2,000 or 3,000 dealers across the country, and most of them sold maybe 5 RVs a year. Some very small number. And then Camping World has 150 stores, and they sell, 500 RVs per store, some huge number. And what we found was this: when the industry was very fragmented, it requires you a lot of capital to sell those RVs. So when the industry went into downturns, which it always does, Camping World would pick up those dealers on pennies on the dollar. Okay, so using Nassim Taleb's framework, fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. Well, to me, Camping World was as an anti-fragile company. What it means, it's actually benefits in this industry from cyclicality. Okay, so in other words, if the industry was not cyclical, let's say I'm making this number up. Let's say Camping World would grow earnings 10% a year. Because that industry is cyclical, long term, that can grow its earnings 15% a year because it benefits from that cyclicality because they have better balance sheet, better management, more diversified, this kind of things. So when you look at the industry, I start thinking about it in this kind of terms. And then I look at, another example. We still own McKesson, which is a drug distributor. And that whole industry only has 3 companies, like basically McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, which now has a new name, which I refuse to remember, and Cardinal Health basically control 95% of that industry. 3 companies. McKesson, I would argue, is the best run company in that industry, but it doesn't really have a structural advantage against the competitors. So therefore, McKesson is robust, but not anti-fragile. So in other words, first of all, pharmaceutical distribution is not cyclical anyway. But if it was cyclical, it doesn't really have an advantage versus its competitors. So anyway, so this is the analysis kind of we go through, just trying to understand how cyclical it is, how the industry structure. And so it's usually when you start in the industry, it depends on its complexity. It takes much longer than if I bought a company that I already owned before, or in the industry that I already owned before. So I hope I answered your question.
Just a little follow-up to that.
Please, yes.
When you start analyzing or trying to figure out more about that industry, the new one, do you get your information from public internet, or do you have other sources where you derive all this information?
I think from, that's a good question. I think from everything. It depends. It depends. If I have friends who know this industry well, I'll talk to them. Sometimes I read books about the industry. Sometimes I just, now I talk to ChatGPT a lot. Like, and I really mean this. This is becoming such a great resource for us, just AI, because we have prompts. We have prompts that we just put in, and we get a research report of 40 pages from deep research. So everything, like we have a position in Watches of Switzerland, which is a reseller of watches. And I actually ended up going to a lot of stores and talking to a lot of people. So, and my son Jonah, who loves watches, and loved the hell out of it. So yeah, so anyway, so it's all the everything. So
Thank you so much.
my pleasure.
Hey, Vitaly. My name is Anshu Bahadur. I'm also from San Jose, California. Enjoy the Saturday morning music that you send out. My question is a little broader. Trying to stay on the economic side of things. As a value investor, is there a fundamental long-term economic and structural shift happening that we should be cautiously about?
Wow, that is such an easy question.
Ask your chauffeur.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah. Maybe I'll search for it. I think the answer is yes. I think today we probably a lot of assumptions which were made in the past about the world economy, and you have to be challenged. I mean, our president challenges them for us. Like there's suddenly, like I almost feel like today we are investing between the tweets. Like there's tweets. I don't literally mean by between the tweets of our president. But wait, just quick question. Microphone. Just please stop. Can you hear me closer? Now? Dying. Can you try a different microphone? Sorry. Is this better? All right. How's this? We got another guy here. So, is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So today we are investing between the tweets, literally, because I know I'm gonna wake up one morning and find out that one of the companies we own could suddenly be highlighted by the president, or the industry could be highlighted by the president. So one modification we have made in our portfolio, we reduce position sizes, because I don't want to blow up in one of those tweets. And there are new risks that I'm not even, they're in the Donald Trump terms, they're known or unknown today. There's more of them. So we have today 60% of our portfolio is outside the United States. Now, by the way, those of you who actually look at our 13F, which is our basically public filings of our holdings, I would caution you to be very careful with that, because you're really seeing only 40% of what we own, and position size and our conviction levels may not necessarily reflect what you see. Yeah, because I don't know, we manage $650 million, something like this, and you only see maybe $200 million, 250 showing up there. So I just wanted to warn you about this. We've been looking a lot more internationally, and we own a lot of European stocks, but we own some Japanese companies as well. I would love to own some Israeli companies. So we've been diversifying ourselves from the United States as well. And it's a diversification that a lot of times I can buy high or higher quality companies and I pay less. So, but again, I have to work harder. Like, there's a cost to that as well. When I buy smaller positions, that means I have to work harder because now I have, instead of 25 stocks, I have 30 or 33 stocks. So, but that's an adjustment we have made in our portfolio for that. But the world is changing, and I think this is one of the cases where you really have to pay attention to the macro. And if you don't, it's going to run you over at some point. It doesn't mean that I'm becoming a macro trader. That's not, I'm just looking at this as a source of opportunity, a source of risks, and kind of try to realign the portfolio accordingly.
Has gold entered your?
Gold?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. My colleague asked me yesterday, Robert asked me, what have you changed your mind over the last 5 years? And this would be an example where I have changed my mind. Like, if I was in this podium 5 or 10 years ago, I would have told you that all the reasons you're going to hear tomorrow, why not gold, right? Like, you can follow you until all the cash flows, etc. But I think the world has changed. The world has changed where we have 35 or 36, maybe 37 trillion dollars debt by the time I'm not speaking today, and it's going up. And we are not really taking it seriously. We make all the sounds that we do, but really, if you want to deal with a debt issue, we have to deal with entitlements, and we're not touching those. So we also probably going to have, so long story short, we're probably going to have more inflation in the future. And with the US dollar is probably going to get weaker because of the way foreign policy has changed. Because we're losing our soft power, because we're becoming a more transactional country. And therefore, to me, if you have a position in gold, not like 50% of your portfolio, but a position in gold, I don't think it's irrational. Not at all. We looking for a way to buy. I don't like, as an investor, I don't like to buy gold in the pure sense, like buy only like ounces of gold, because number of ounces is never going to change. So I'd like to find a way where I can own exposure to gold, where through business where the number of ounces I own will grow as well, just even if I want the price. So that's how I'd like to do this, but yeah, so it's not irrational to own gold. Thank you.
Hi, Vitaly. I'm Chloe from Singapore. Once again, thanks for all the books and amazing newsletter that have been publishing. And my question is, what's like what you said, if you invest in individual stocks, you do need to spend a lot of effort and energy. What's your take on index investing for people who don't want to spend so much time and energy on this? And what do you think is the expected return for index, let's say S&P 500? And one more question regarding like when you talk about diversification, right? Do you think that ETF will be a great way to diversify into other markets, be it in China, India, or all other like developing sectors?
Thank you so much, Chloe. So wait, the microphone check, is it better? Is it, First of all, let's disclose these biases that stare you in the face right here. Indices is not my friends, right? So then you're asking for Walker for the haircut. So you get in the answer, all right. I'll give you several answers because it's a complex question. Okay, answer number one. If you are buying S&P 500 today, your return over the next 10, 15 years, most likely to be either negative or close to very unlikely to be positive. It's positive very mildly, most likely to be negative, just because the where valuation is, where the margins are, where the profit margins of corporate America are, and where the interest rates are likely to go. Okay, so if you just buy an average company, but when you're basically buying, when you buy index, you buy like a basket of stocks, right? So I'm not very excited about that basket. So now, could you do better in the index than if you give money to somebody who is gonna be trading it? Maybe. Like so it depends, the question becomes, what are the alternatives you have? If you have somebody who you trust, who you, if I say Buffett was not 95 years old, but was 65 years old, then would you rather give your money to somebody like Buffett or an index fund? That's it, that's a very simple answer, right? So if you have better alternatives where you're not gonna blow up, I would argue, do that. When it comes to international investing, so okay, just the point I want to make is this. This is a very, very important point. When people look at index investing or ETFs, they find safety in diversification. But if you diversified yourself on a whole bunch of the eggs, are you really diversified? Like in other words, if you're buying a whole bunch of overlaid companies, yes, you remove the individual risk of one company blowing up. But if you're buying everything that's expensive, then you're really not diversified yourself from the overvaluation risk. So that's something you want to be aware of. Now, let's talk about the international investing. Like some countries, for instance, we can't really buy if you wanted to. Like Americans cannot buy Indian stocks. Like Schwab, like for us to buy Indian stocks, is actually impossible. Nothing wrong with India, but it's, India stock market is closed to American investors unless you register in India, it's really impossible. So if I wanted to own Indian stocks, I would buy an ETF. Okay, because that's Another thing is that when it comes to international investment, we have to be aware that when you especially go outside of Western world, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm a tourist because, and this is the very different cultures, and then going to Japan made me realize how it's a different world. Like Asia, for Westerners going to Asia, it's a different world. I would argue you probably have a competitive advantage against me, just invest in Asia because you spend a lot more time there. So if you let's say like let me go back to Warren Buffett. In the late 90s, when the stock market was blowing up, he kind of created his own index. Really, he literally pulled, he knew nothing about those companies. He literally looked at the Moody's book of all Korean stocks and just say, okay, this company seems like a good business. I'll buy a little bit of this. And he bought, I don't know how many he bought, 50 or 10 or 15 or 20. He created his own index, basically, knowing that he is the patsy at the poker table. But at this point in time, everything is cheap. So that's what index fund allows you to do as an investor like me. So I guess I can see that that strategy making sense. And if I hope I answered the question. If you want to answer.
Do you mind if I ask one more question? What's your take on Bitcoin? Since just now you talk about gold, right? Like what do you think about this?
Listen, I reserve a right 5 years from now say change my mind. So let me give you that's gonna be my answer right now. As a 5 years from now, we say no one. Yeah, this change. Right now, I see Bitcoin as it's kind of interesting. I usually don't use foul language in my letters, but there is Bitcoin and there's shitcoins, right? Okay, and there's a important distinction. So I have a much higher confidence on shitcoins, right? But no, I'm not going to Bitcoin right now. Everything else, right? Because it's like this is a true story. A friend of mine texted me 2 weeks ago, and he says, "Take a look at this." And this is some kind of offering, I forget, a Brazilian company or Argentinian company or something. And he says, "Listen, they promised they're gonna pump this shitcoin, and it's gonna, I can buy it for a penny today, and they're gonna pump it, and then I can sell it for a higher price." And And I said, just realize that, right now you're full, now you have to find more greater fools for you to buy. But this thing is worthless. It's not worth a penny, it's worth zero. And you're just hoping that some other fools that it's complete. This is what Ponzi scheme looks like. Like this is what Ponzi scheme looks like. So that was just a definition of shit code, right? And there was, I don't know, you can create something every 10 times a day like this, that falls into the shit coin category. Now, Bitcoin is the reason what has changed about Bitcoin over the last 6 months, and that's a structural change. Our government actually legitimized it, which is the dumbest thing I've seen a government official do. And by the way, this is not even political. This is just common sense. When you have $37 trillion of debt and your reserve currency, because you're a monopoly, do you want to cede something that can compete with you? That's idiotic. So it's possible that 5 years from now, I'll give the same answer to Bitcoin as I give an answer about gold today. But I can add so little value to the conversation that I'm gonna stick to what I know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniel from New Jersey. This is my first time coming to your event. Thank you so much for hosting this. I have 2 questions. First, I want to get your insight on stay fully invested versus keep a portion cash on the sideline. Currently, we have a considerable drawdown in the market, but maybe the market is still relatively high. Yet we have so many uncertainties. And yesterday I saw a CNBC report. Someone, well-known investor, had 95% cash. But I also hear other investors say, we want to stay fully invested. Otherwise, our investment earning power will be damaged long term. So the question one. So the second question related to a previous discussion. In the current environment, U.S. currency on the will be threatened, and with the U.S. Coming back from Europe. So what do you feel are the markets, like the European market, Germany, and what is thought about the investment in China from purely investment perspective?
Well, thank you very much. The first question is easy because I have a luxury of owning individual stocks, and cash in our portfolio is not me trying to time the market. It's literally, it's a byproduct of our ability or the inability to find new stocks globally. So as I mentioned before, we have a smaller position, can reduce some position sizes a little bit. So now I have to find more stocks. We even in an expensive market, if we can find from a portfolio of high quality companies that significant value, it will be fully invested. It's easier to find more opportunities, obviously, when the market does have a sell off. I would argue in our case that our cash is going to be just by product of us finding the stocks. If you can, so we today I think our new accounts are maybe 50% invested. Like if you give somebody a wills check for $500 million, only $500,000 could be put to work. That a couple of weeks ago, that number was maybe 62% or something. And a year from now, that may be lower or higher. I have no idea. But I think timing the market is very, very difficult. Like when you try to time the market, and especially if you try to do this based on some kind of economic analysis, etc., looking for a recession. So, I'm not very good at this. And I think knowing what you're good at and what you are not good at is very important in investing. So that's the answer to your first question. Second question, I have sort of rules. Remember how I told you in the beginning that life is too short to make certain decisions? Well, I would argue life is too short for me. By the way, just think about it for a second. Everything I tell you is, a lot of times it sounds prescriptive, but like I'm really just talking about life, like I have certain biases, right? Okay, and a lot of times when I say things, it's just really manifestation of my biases. Okay, so it's up to you to determine if you and I share the same biases, or when I say this, that apply to you, you're going to modify it, to your biases. But here's, I grew up in the Soviet Union. I grew up in a country that did not value individual rights. So it's very difficult for me to invest in China or other country where where they don't do this, where they don't value individual rights. And I don't want to wake up one morning and find out that the stock I thought I owned, I don't own it anymore. So I don't want to introduce this headache to my life. Again, this is my biases. And it's actually kind of interesting because I remember Charlie Munger, which I highly respect this, maybe a year before he died, he talked about his investments in China. And he talked about how he would not invest in Russia because, that he was fine investing in China. And he was talking about how Jeff Gundlach, the person he respected, banking, would not invest in China. And Charlie Munger admitted maybe because they had different biases. So I think there's a lot of terrific companies in China, but there's also Chinese government that may change the economics of those businesses. So I'm not agnostic to investing all over the world, but I want to invest in the countries that actually have a simple test, and this is a true. If I write a very scathing negative article about the leader of the country, would I be afraid to travel into the country? And I remember, it's a true story. I've been since I left Russia in 1991. I've been there once, and in 2008. And I remember in 2008, where I wrote a very scathing article about Putin, and I did not publish it because I realized if I go there, nobody knows who I am there. So that I don't have a self-aggrandizing, thoughts that I'm that important. But I get pulled over for jaywalking, and then they Google me, and they find it. No, seriously, they Google me. They find this article. I may or not come back home. So it's kind of the same thing about. So this is why investing in countries like China, this is not something I'm going to do. Doesn't mean that other people should not do it. So I hope that's the question.
What is the thought about European market, some European countries, in light of the U.S. pullback? Could that also stimulate the European countries to become more active in terms of entrepreneurship, innovation, technology?
And this may be a hopeful thinking on my part, but I think what's happening in Europe possibly very bullish for Europe in the long term. Let me explain Europe a little bit. Europe today is basically rebuilding its defense industry. For the most part, until, and I wrote about this, but I watched this interview with Dmitry Kuleba, who was a Ukrainian foreign minister. And he was a foreign minister when the war started, when Ukraine started. And he said in February 2022, his job was to, from that point on, is to go to European countries and other countries and ask them for weapons. And what he discovered that, to his shock, that Europe had no weapons in their warehouses. Europe would have, European companies would have weapons that they would parade through all these shows, and their warehouses were empty. Germany did not have enough rifles and bulletproof vests for its soldiers. So if you, by the way, side note to this, when you hear Russian propaganda that they invaded Ukraine because of NATO,
Germany is the largest country in Europe, and it had no weapons. So I don't think it was a threat to Russia. That was the excuse. But anyway, so when you're rebuilding your defense industry, if you think about defense equipment, there is a highly technological, highly industrial, highly complicated those pieces of machinery. I guess those highly sophisticated pieces. If you can build them, then you can start. You create an ability. First of all, you start creating new supply chains, and the supply chain, by the way, will exclude the United States. And I'll come back to this in a second one. And but you also you kind of that's going to pull your industries that were sclerotically sent out to China and other countries. So I'm very bullish. So I'm somewhat optimistically bullish on Europe. And as much as I don't like to see the world getting more weaponized, in this case, maybe that's the right thing to do, though it has its own risks. And also, I think it's going to make Europe stronger as an industry, from industrialization perspective. Now, why Europeans would not be buying, would not be relying on the U.S. Supply chain is very simple. If you buy F-35 from Lockheed Martin, it's a great plane, but parts of this plane have to be replaced every few months. And you have to basically rely that the US government will send you those parts continuously. Or Lockheed Martin will send you the parts, but the US government will allow Lockheed Martin to send those parts. And what we saw in Ukraine, when the United States basically would not stop software support for F-16s that Ukraine did not even get from the United States, but they got from some other European country. But when Trump was negotiating with Ukraine, he basically stopped support for the software for F-16s, which made them basically naked to Russian missiles. Europeans look at us and say, we could be that too. So you saw already Portugal canceling they were going to order F-35s from Lockheed. They canceled those orders. You saw Switzerland doing something similar. And so I think this industrialization, kind of this increase in defense spending in Europe is not going to be that helpful to American companies. So anyway, so that's a very long answer to a very good question. Thank you. Thanks.
Hey, this is Tao Lu from Seattle. Glad to be here. I have two questions. The first one is probably simpler. Can you share with us your thesis behind Uber? And then the second one is more personal. I haven't looked at the actual data, but I am under the impression that value investors tend to get more marriage issues than average engineers or chess players. I would love to hear your thoughts on the reason, and then any sort of personal prevention mechanism that you have. That will be very helpful for me in the long term. Thank you.
Wow. All right. Let me start with the easy question, but it's so somebody asked me a while back, like, what's investment I'm the most proud of? And it's not necessarily best investment. And I'll give you two examples. So the investment, probably one of the best investments I ever made that I'm not that proud of is we bought Rheinmetall, which is a German defense company, like two years ago. And that was a 10x for us. Okay? I'm not that proud of it because it wasn't difficult to do this. It wasn't difficult to do this. And there was I'm not sure, I mean, we were right. I'm not sure we were 10x right. I mean, since my analysis was, was really worthy of 10x return. Okay, so so this is an investment where I made a lot more money than I made at Uber so far. I think on Uber we made 2 or 3 times more. 2 2 or 3x roughly. But to me, Uber was a more interesting investment because how much it required me to be contrarian. Okay, so that was at least. Sometimes I think being contrarian has been over glorified. But to me, when I'm right, like Uber is a special investment because I remember when we were buying it, like and I wrote about this. I literally, like when we bought the stock, and we rarely hear from my clients, like when we buy stocks, never hear from them. I literally got 4 or 5 calls and emails asking like if my daughter Hannah is making decisions for me. and to me, that was such a great sign. Because at the time, you read every single newspaper and they will tell you how it's a failed business, how much money it lost, etc. And it's so there was a lot of unleaked information, from outside media and from my clients. What we saw in Uber and what we see today, you basically see an industry it helped to create. It didn't create it, it helped. It didn't start the industry, but it helped to create, where it's a reducing car ownership. I can't imagine my life today without Uber. Like I used to, so I've been coming to Omaha since 2008, 2009, I forget the year. And every single time before we had to rent a car. And I remember how much I hated that. And today, I take rent the car when I'm here, it's not even into my mind because there's Uber. And there was 5 of us in the street, and we had an Uber XL, and that was easy. So Uber is an industry where the companies, the winner almost takes all, because the larger you are, the more drivers you have, so it's and what's very important to understand is this: you kind of get used to how little time it takes from the point you push a button and you get a car, but that's a big deal, and Uber has that. So when we analyze Uber, it's very difficult. It's psychologically difficult, but I try to use a very crayonish analysis, like not use a sharp pencil, but use a crayon, and kind of knowing that I need to be vaguely right. And this is a company that has such a model that checks off almost all the boxes, right? So I look at Uber and I say this is a company we can own for 5 or 10, 15 years. They only own it for 5 years. Now the threat to Uber is self-driving, is full self-driving. And actually, I'll be a bit more specific. It's not full self-driving that's a threat. It's the Waymo that's a threat. I'll be more specific. It's not Waymo that's a threat. It's the Waymo being the only full self-driving taxi available. That's very important. Okay, because of this. Let's say there's a lot of Waymos out there. Not just one Waymo, but there was a Waymo and other competitors like Zooms and others. Okay, then they desperately need Uber, and here's why. Okay, let me give you this very oversimplified example. But let's say the peak demand for Uber is at 5 o'clock. And at peak demand, you need 100 cars. And 2 o'clock, let's say very little demand. Let's say you need 30 cars. Okay, and let's say Waymo, Uber does not exist, and it's only Waymo out there. So Waymo has to make a decision. Do they own 30 cars or 100 cars? Okay, if they own 30 cars, their utilization is going to be perfect. It's going to be 100% utilization because at 2 o'clock, every car is going to be utilized. And at 5 o'clock, when demand is for 100 cars, all of those 30 cars will be utilized. There's only one problem. At 5 o'clock, people will be pushing the button, and 70 of them will not get a car on time. Okay, so therefore, Waymo has to, they can make another choice. They can say, okay, you know what, we don't want to make a move. Therefore, we're going to own 100 cars. So at 5 o'clock, you hit the button, you get a car on time. It's great. Except throughout the day, at 2 o'clock, 70 of those cars are staying still, okay? So the reason Uber works today, because a lot of drivers make a choice, well, there is no demand, I'll do something else, right? So Waymo needs Uber, okay? Now, because they can own 30 cars, and they get very high return on investment, and they can be on the Uber platform. You push a button, you can go on your app, you say, oh, there's self-driving available, I take this. Okay, so that's a bit of Uber. Now, the tricky part is this: if there's only Waymo and nobody else, then Waymo bargaining power with Uber is much stronger. Okay, if there are alternatives, then they're just the more alternatives to Waymo out there, the more bargaining power Uber has. And this is what basically I've been obsessed trying to figure out. But that's kind of my analysis of Uber today. So, by the way, if you guys haven't read my 15-page write-up on Uber, just trust me, I just read that, because there is no way I can do it better than that. Second question about marriage. Oh God, this is actually a very good question, because to really be a good investor, you really have to have a mild obsession. And this obsession often comes at the expense of other parts of your life. Okay? And then, as a person, you basically have to make a decision: what kind of life do you want to have? Okay? And I think you have to put in, this is what I do, put guardrails in life. And which is not, by the way, this applies not just to investing, but to anybody who's obsessed with any profession. And you basically have to say, okay, well, when I'm home, I might still be thinking about Uber or spending time with my kids. And like, I know that one thing I learned over the years, that psychology is stronger than me. So like the lizard brain is stronger than my logical brain. And so I put these guardrails intentionally. So when I travel, I try to travel with my kids. And so it's because usually in the marriage is the ones that kind of apparently breaking up. But actually what you don't see is the relationship with your kids breaking up. So you don't get a divorce from the kids. Right? I religiously drive my youngest daughter to school every day. For me, it's almost like a So I basically make effort. Like on Friday night, my whole family gets together for dinner, and that's not negotiable. So I create this kind of guardrails in my life. When I say the word forced to spend time with my family, that sounds like I don't want to do this, but it's actually just to protect me from my lizard brain, from doing what I'm obsessed about, just all the time. So, but this is how I, this is basically how I deal with that. Hopefully it helps.
It helps. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, it's Dan from, I'm based in Hong Kong. Just a quick follow-up on Uber, and then a question about Didi. So Uber, I was in Dallas a couple days ago. I took a 20-kilometer ride. It cost me $60. And I asked the driver, he was going to take $20 for that, and Uber was taking 40. So I just wonder, to what degree do you think that Uber is potentially over-earning? I mean, obviously the growth is fantastic. It is a monopoly business. Does that concern you at all, that the driver's only making $20 on a $60 ride? Maybe start with that and I'll ask you about it.
All right, so my kids will tell you that every single drive, every single time I take Uber, and I think a lot from this conversation with drivers, and I hear the same story you just told me. And here's the funny part about the story: it's not true. And I'll explain what you mean. What I mean is, so Uber is a public company, so they actually disclose the take rate. So in other words, they disclose how much money they make, and they don't make 60% of the take rate. They make what, 25 to 28%. Okay. So, but what you said is actually, that story is very true, but it's not true overall. So let me say about it. So, and I think it's a problem. By the way, I do think it's a problem. What you just told me, I think that's a problem. So there was this great guy that I really that I wanted to read his books and listen to his interviews. Rory Sutherland. Rory is a marketing guy, and he's the vice chairman of Ogilvy, which is an advertising agency in London. And he has a great book called Alchemy. And he approaches problems from a lot of problems that we try to solve logically. A lot of times they can be solved psychologically. So a lot of those problems are psychological, not logical. This is how much time it takes me to answer the question. But I say, because I thought a lot about this, but you were very good with the question. So anyway, so here's the logical answer. The Uber take rate is 25 to 28%. But what's more important psychologically, that's not the driver's thing. Here's why. Uber has a dynamic pricing for the take rate. And what I mean by this, the ride from the airport, the Uber may take a high take rate. But that take rate will subsidize the ride where they're gonna pay you much 80%, like 90% or even 100% of the bill to drive when it's in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so those drivers that drive to people in the middle of nowhere are not complaining about that they just got $60 out of 60. Okay, so at the end of the day, the average take rate is whatever 25 to 28%. But I hear this all the time. But here's the problem. I think it's actually that's horrible for Uber.